Thanks, Rhino. How many indie developers are actually here? Okay, good, 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 excellent. I was just wondering, hope there weren't too many finance or legal people, so hopefully addressing a decent audience. So I think everybody knows how successful the industry has been, particularly the last couple of years. So that was kind of the premise behind this presentation, was really thinking about some of the amazing success stories in Europe. You've had Supercell, Rovio, Natural Motion, which just recently got acquired, King, obviously, which is going to plan on a multi-billion-dollar IPO. So there's tremendous interest, not just from existing venture capital investors that have traditionally always invested in the space. Some have kind of been committed to it, and others not so much, that I'll get into later in the presentation, but also some new investors from Asia, from other angels, other industries, other entrepreneurs, et cetera. So just a couple of bullet points on Agnitio. We're an investment bank based in London, founded in 2003. We are an advisor and an investor, focused primarily on the gaming industry. Just to tell you quickly some recent deals we did. So we advised Future Games of London, which is a studio I'm sure many of you know, the developers of Hungry Shark Evolution. We helped them sell the business to Ubisoft back in October. And then actually just in November of last year, we helped Ocean View Games, which is a Finnish mobile gaming startup, raise seed funding from Gameville, one of the largest Korean publicly traded mobile gaming publishers. Some of our principal investments, again, we kind of act as an angel investor as well. I mentioned Ocean View Games. We were the first external investor. Social Spiel, which is the developer of the browser-based game Asterix, published by Deutsche Telekom in the German-speaking region. Hutch Games, which is based in London, which has developed some titles like Smash Cops Heat, Smash Bandits, and then Five Ants, which is a publisher of Tiny Thief, which works with Rovio Stars. So I thought it'd probably be interesting to at least look at some of the deals that have occurred in the last, call it about 14, 15 months, and then talk through some of these a little bit more in detail on the next slide. I think what is interesting is if you look at sort of midway through last year until this, let's say until recently, and if you look at the focus of the companies getting funded, you can clearly see that most of them are focused on original IP development. So really, what has been a huge transition, I'd say in the last couple of years, particularly from the fallout of Zynga, when a lot of investors just really shunned or avoided investing in the European landscape, you've had a lot of investors come back in and support original IP developers. A lot of it probably based off of the success of Supercell, Rovio, and indeed Natural Motion. So what is interesting is a lot of the fundraisings have occurred in Finland over the last 14, 15 months. And again, a lot of it due to riding the coattails of Supercell and Rovio, and now you sort of have these new companies that a lot of investors are betting their fortunes on, such as Grand Cru and Gray Area. But what also is interesting is you've had a lot of activity in the Nordics, again in Sweden with MAG Interactive, in Iceland with Plain Vanilla, and obviously also some deal activity in the UK and Germany. So what is certainly noticeable is a lack of investment activity or deal activity in Southern Europe, and also in some Eastern European countries. Personally, I think there's tremendous talent there. It's just a lack of funding sources, and I think I'll get into that a little bit later. This, I wouldn't say perceived, but real funding gap that exists in Europe, and always has. So most of the companies, as you could see, that were funded were really focused on some part of the value chain of developing a game, from sort of inception, concept, design phase, to development, to launching, to player acquisition, and then ultimately live operations. As I mentioned, a lot of the deals were done on original IP development. One thing also, very few deals, if you noticed on the previous slide, were actually companies focused on developing online, PC downloadable, or console games. So clearly there's been a real shift to not only original IP development, but really a focus on mobile. Average deal size, again, around, I wouldn't even say 5 million, probably 3 or 4 million dollars or less. And this is principally because you really don't need that much funding if you're an indie studio to get your prototype out there, to build a great team, and at least have some sort of soft launch and metrics that you can share for then considering a larger, further round if necessary. And some of the deals that were done over sort of 10 million were largely done more for sort of platform, technology-oriented, or software sort of marketing companies like Aplift, AppGratis, companies focused on really assisting with or the development or marketing of mobile games. So again, which VCs are investing? That's why I think a lot of you guys are in the audience here. I think a lot of you will recognize a number of these names. Index and Excel have consistently always been investors in the space, even during adverse market conditions, particularly after Zynga announced some pretty poor earnings, and which really, and also if you layer that in with the sort of negative macroeconomic conditions of Europe, they've consistently still invested in companies. So, definitely great guys to know, based in London, and again, very, very selective though. You have other companies as well, Qualcomm, Nokia, that have invested alongside each other on a number of companies such as Grand Crew, and also have done deals in other parts of the world. Lifeline in Finland will pretty much get involved in a lot of early stage deals and have been incredibly successful with investing in Supercell. These VCs are always, as I said, committed. They know the industry intimately well. They're looking out for a lot of senior guys at companies like Rovio and Supercell who are considering leaving those companies and setting up their own businesses. If you can get access to these guys, they are really, I think, will add a lot of value to your business. But again, they can afford to be very selective. They're really looking for the next Rovio, Supercell. So you really have to go in there and present a really compelling reason why they should invest in your company. There's obviously a number of other venture capital investors in Europe that will sort of, what I like to say, dip in and out. So when market conditions are favorable, when they see exits occurring, when the space is hot, they'll start to get active. And a lot of them are doing that right now. And I'm sure some of you are getting probably calls or inquiries from people you've never really heard of before. Again, hey, if you can get the capital, go for it. See if you can negotiate yourself a decent deal. But if you're thinking more long-term, and if you do have the ability to attract some of these more committed players, they're really definitely going to add a lot more value from a long-term perspective to your business. The other reason, the last point, if you're a VC, and I can say this also being an investor myself, it's really tough to cover a lot of industries. There's already, if you look at the landscape in Europe, you have only really fundamentally, not that many VCs, but you have dozens and dozens, hundreds of opportunities they look at. So think about it from their perspective. They're probably looking at 50 business plans a week, and probably who knows how many gaming opportunities come their way. They have to be incredibly selective. It's their business to say no. So you really have to find a way to get their attention. Which leads me to other sources of capital. And I think this is where, for me at least, the industry is getting really exciting and interesting. I think you noticed on some of those deals, even to hear about, I mean, if you asked me 2 years ago, would a company like Gameville invest at a seed stage level in a European mobile gaming studio, I would have taken that bet and told you absolutely not. So the sheer fact that you're having strategics, particularly Koreans and other Asian players, coming and investigating and looking at doing, initially, let's say it was probably just a publishing deal, but now looking to do sort of joint equity investment and publishing deals, I think it's an excellent time to be talking to some of these, well, let's say strategics. They also are going to be fairly different when it comes to negotiating as a VC, and a lot of their terms are going to be probably more favorable. Another source would obviously be the advent of crowdfunding platforms such as Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and you've had some examples of companies such as PlayJam and Cliffhanger who've successfully raised money via Kickstarter. I'd say it's probably a good kind of starting or sort of a starter of method of raising money, probably up to $500,000 to $1 million. It gets harder the larger amounts that you want to raise, but definitely something viable and something you should consider if you want to get a prototype out there and consider it. I'm not going to speak too much more because I know Jan from Cliffhanger has a whole session dedicated to this a little bit later today. And then angels. I think angels now, given the success of mobile gaming and a lot of indie studios that have performed exceptionally well in Europe, are getting increasingly more interested in investing at an early stage. And so for a lot of you sort of emerging smaller developers out there, I think it's really exciting to talk to some of these angels and initially raise a smaller amount. Don't dilute yourself down so much. Get a prototype, get a game, soft launch it, and see what lessons you've learned and how you can sort of refine it, continue to iterate and develop a better game, and then potentially maybe talk to some of the VCs I mentioned on some of the previous slides. And then also I want to bring up Tekis in Finland. A lot of people attribute the success of companies like Rovio and Supercell, whatnot, to fantastic game development skills, programming capabilities, the dark winters where nobody goes outside and just wants to stay at home and program. And I think those are all valid points. However, I think one of the key fundamental reasons for success has been the willingness and the ability for Tekis to invest in all of those companies. And whether it's Rovio, Supercell, or Grand Crew, they've all received funding from Tekis in the form of grants and soft loans. And so again, I always try to tell, certainly the various organizations in the UK, and if I had access to other ones as well, how important it is to really foster and even in small increments, you can really make a difference to the local gaming industries. I thought I'd transition a little bit here because I think it's one thing to kind of look at things from an investment perspective, but I think it's also really important what you guys should know that what are investors really looking for. So I mean, again, the number one point I think everybody will say it is your team. An investor, if they don't know you, if they don't understand often what are the intricacies of the game and how rapidly the industry is moving, they want to have some security that you guys have been developing games for a while. Hopefully, you've worked together for a long time. Your core team is well well known and recognized. Obviously, then hopefully that means you guys have established a decent track record. You've launched a successful game. You've designed something interesting and even potentially, hopefully, sold a business in the past. These are all these bullet points are really just there to assist the investor in de-risking their potential investment in your company. Third bullet point, again, it's because, again, the game development process has become so intricate and the industry so massive, other parts or major functions of creating a studio now, whether it's free-to-play game design, user acquisition, managing all those, your data analytics system, to marketing and launching and live ops, you have specific companies now that have raised substantial amounts of money to focus on those various bits of the value chain, to then allow you to just focus on game development. So there's never been a better time, in my opinion, to be a game developer because you can outsource all those functions at relatively inexpensive amounts of money. So again, that's why I continue to harp upon you guys presenting as best of a team and a track record and proposition and unique reason why an investor should invest in your company. Again, if you can think about unique business models that you can launch, different types of gameplay mechanics, software technology that'll allow you to, I don't want to say monetize better because it can be a dangerous word, but certainly encourage users to play the game as much as possible, and then at the same time kind of subtly make money out of it. And then how to attract investors? Well, this is never an easy thing. As I said before, there is a funding gap. There's a very limited amount of investors in Europe. Thankfully now you have strategics and people from other parts of the world looking at Europe pretty carefully and looking at the next big studio to come out of here. But stand out from the crowd. Become a thought leader, try to contribute to various different gaming industry websites that every gaming investor reads, such as gamesindustry.biz, GamesBeat, GamesBrief. Get exposure. If you have the ability, try to get a booth, get yourself noticed, create consensus out there. The second point, I think a lot of people, again, and I understand how busy you are creating and developing a game. It's your passion, it's your baby. I get it, but don't ever expect to raise money after a few meetings. It's never going to happen. This is all about building relationships. So I always liken it to dating. It takes time, before a relationship blossoms. So you got to get to know these people. They need to understand your vision, strategy, how you're going to make your game successful. And again, it has to be sort of a two-way highway. Another, point I'd probably, and I'd like to use an example as well, is be persistent. So Plain Vanilla Games in Iceland, was about to go bust. And they basically, again, small country of Iceland, 300,000 people, where are they going to raise money from? So they actually picked up the senior guys and moved to California and spent 6 months running around trying to get to know every single possible investor and successfully raise some angel money. And then eventually set up the business there and then, raised another 2 massive rounds of capital. So I'm not suggesting that you have to do the same, but get to know your investors, spend time, understand what they're looking for, see their existing portfolio, and try to see if there's areas of synergy. Again, another point that I would say is also try to de-risk the element that a lot of investors would allude to of this industry being hit run. So try to find ways in which you can focus on again a soft launch and have some data or metrics that you can provide an investor, such as how many DAUs you have, your ARPDAUs, your retention rates, your lifetime value of your users. Again, be resourceful as well. I would say that investors are always going to find a reason to say no rather than yes. So you have to refute why they will not want to invest in your company. So again, I think it's important to just consistently, not take no for an answer from them, go back to them, constantly update them with, what sort of improvements or advances you've been making in your business, and be positive. Last 2 points I'm going to talk about would be, if you are fundamentally thinking about this and really seriously committed to raising money, make sure your financials and your documentation are ready. The last thing in the world you want is an investor to come. You have taken a lot of time and effort to get that meeting set up through your network, and you show up and you don't know your numbers. That's really, really disappointing to an investor. So have your documentation, have your financials ready. And the last point is, if you actually are continuing to progress and you do see that there's an opportunity to potentially get investment, get advice from someone you trust. Doesn't have to be an advisor, doesn't have to be a lawyer, from somebody you trust. This is your passion, this is your baby. I've seen so many companies I've met in the last couple of years that have gotten poor advice or thought they could do an investment round with a financially sophisticated investor on their own, and they have suffered gravely for it. So that's it. Q&A?
I'm going to ask the first question. When I get calls from people, the first question they always ask is, what is my company worth? And there comes the tricky question, how do you get a valuation? Is it by X amount versus X percent, and therefore there's a valuation? That's question one. And two, should you raise the valuation, or should the investor come up with the valuation?
Well, it's both good points, and thanks for putting me on the spot. I would say, I think a lot of, maybe I'll take a step back, and I'll probably answer the second question first, because it'll lead into the first one. So I think it really depends on the evolution of your business. If you're an early stage startup, you're not really going to be able to even figure out a valuation. So to some degree, I would say if you're that early stage guy, raise a smaller amount of money and you dictate what you're willing to let go of. I think that's a better position to start from. So if you have a certain amount that you want to raise, you should fundamentally tell yourself, okay, I'm willing to part with X% of my company for X amount of cash. I think then to talk about valuation, I think valuation comes more into play the larger you are. Once you have a piece of software, a game that has some metrics, it's generating some revenue, it's got some really quantifiable types of figures, I think then the whole perception, or you can really then have a more meaningful discussion around valuation.
Got it. Any more questions, someone? Not all together? Okay, then I continue. The difference between seed and actually Series A. Can you explain a little bit more about it?
Sure. So seed rounds would traditionally be a lower amount of money that you'd want to raise. So I think that for the earlier stage developers, you're looking at sort of a small amount from call it 50 to 100 grand up to sort of €500,000. And that's really kind of defined as sort of a seed stage that you could raise from even sometimes angels to sometimes, let's say, one particular super angel or just gaming focused VC or sort of group of gaming entrepreneurs. And a Series A would then sort of really be in the millions. Yeah. No.
Oh.
Jürgen, Simon, is there any is there any sign of that the successful gaming companies are reinvesting in the industry?
It's a great question, and something I ask and I've told Ilka and Kai many times, that is their opportunity right now to really be supporting the industry. But I think that for a whole host of reasons, they would rather organically set up more teams than invest and take minority positions in companies, because one, they're not well versed in doing deals. It's not their core competence. And I think the second reason being they just might find it more of a distraction rather than organically setting up a business internally and just owning 100% of that.
But they are part of Lifeline, right?
What's that?
They are part of Lifeline. They invested some in the fund, and then other people will. So indirectly they do it? Yes,
indirectly. But again, I mean, I think the only company in Europe that I've seen that would take minority investments now that certainly is looking is King. It's the only one I've that actively still looks.
By setting up studios in different kind of cities and employ people. Yeah. Question: has anyone raised money here in this room? Let's hear some amounts if you can share.
Thanks. Hi, this is Michael from Rockfish. We got an absolutely new studio. Prior to that, I ran Fish Labs for 10 years, and we were in 3D mobile space, and we raised €1 million back in 2007 with Neuhaus Partners. That's a mid-tier investor in Germany, basically to come up with our own distribution platform back then when mobile games have been distributed through operators. That didn't go well for many reasons. Sure. So, and one of the biggest mistakes we did was in our first round we gave away 50%. I mean, we were with our back against the wall, we had to sign the deal.
Did you get some advice?
No.
Aha.
Yeah, so that is something you rather say no. So if an investor comes up and says A round 50%, because the issue was after that we weren't able to close a B round, because if you do that and if you don't have a super great valuation, you're a single digit guy. And then every investor says, well, actually, I don't see you guys working your ass off for the next 5 years.
Correct.
To make this a super exit.
Dilute it down too much.
That's one. My second experience last year.
But which investor would actually want to have 50%? That is a question you should wonder.
Yeah.
Because I think I speak for Shum too. If you are getting an investor on board, he wants you to work, he wants you to have a great future, because his future will be great.
I would have thought that's their approach, but we had a different experience. Let's put it this way.
Okay.
The next thing I found out, I think last year we talked to 150 potential partners, strategic buyers, VCs, angels, and whatnot. And as great the story is with Supercell and everything, it was like literally every investor said, well, you got a great team. We were close to 80 people. We had our own tech. We had an awesome relationship with Apple. Galaxy on Fire was our main title, was featured continuously on the App Store, 12 million downloads for a hardcore open space shooter. I think this is really astonishing. However, every investor said, well, if you do a free-to-play version of that, does it have the potential to make 500,000 US a day?
Jeez.
Yeah, and I was like, clearly, no, that's not the case. Well, then say, well, thankfully, you don't have to pay for the coffee, talk is ended. So now here's my question. I ran through all this, showing great metrics and everything. I understand it's a numbers game, but meanwhile, I find it's a chicken and egg situation, because if you don't have great numbers, they said, we're not interested. If you have great numbers, you know what? I don't need you, investor, anymore. I do a soft launch, I have great numbers, I just flip a switch, that's it. Apple is going to feature it most likely because it's a great game. Otherwise, I wouldn't have good numbers. So I don't need you. Oh, well, you're not helping me. And to get there, meanwhile, I'd say 500K to do a great game with great numbers, I don't see that at mobile. That's over. You need 7 digits.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm saying that if you're an indie studio, it's harder if you don't know VCs, given your experience, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, if you have a small team, better to raise a small amount, at least soft launch a game, have some metrics, and then use that to then go to talk to other people.
The downside was with metrics that are okay, then people look at your metrics, well, your metrics are not that great, right? Well, this is why I'm talking to you, because I want to make them better.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're not good, we're not interested.
It's always a risky run.
Yeah, I'm just saying,
always
I'm just sharing. So you see everybody's like kind of waiting and dodging. Oh, are you going to be the next Supercell? I want to see it. Well, if we are this already in New Zealand, you know what? I don't need you anymore. So,
There you go.
Thanks. Okay, thank you very much, Shum. Give it a hand.